Introduction to Business the Game is a simulation that emulates managing. What exactly is managing? Managing is a series of processes that essentially terminate or end in a decision. What is it that we do as managers? Well, what we do is we monitor a series of measures and metrics. We may monitor the gas tank in our automobile, and if we see the gauge gets very low, we stop and get gasoline. We may monitor, if you will, the road speed signs and look at our speedometer to determine we are driving within the speed limit and adjust accordingly. So as a manager, what it is we do, we monitor a series of measures and metrics, and if necessary, we then manage. Well, that is what Introduction to Business, the game, attempts to emulate. You acting as a manager in a real-world environment to successfully manage a corporation, successfully make a series of decisions that will enable the corporation to grow, to improve, to become a larger entity than what it is. And so to begin the discussion, to begin to understand the process of managing, we need to understand that we perform a series of steps. The first and most important is due diligence. Due diligence is where we as managers analyze the information that is presented to us so we can make a much better informed decision. And the simulation will emulate that. So first, let's actually begin by logging into the simulation and taking a look at the due diligence screen, or the dashboard screen as we call it, or the control screen. So we're going to go in and you're going to use your login information, and immediately you are brought to the control panel, if you will, the dashboard. And as you can see, in this case, the student, Dimitri, is looking at some of the elements of their due diligence. But before we get to the due diligence, also on the screen is showing you the links that you have into the various product decisions. We have product, which is where you design the product, select the market. You have marketing, which is where you determine the ad plans that create the advertising campaign, and then the pricing of the product and the promotional budgets, as well as the order quantities. And then lastly, you have cash flow. And so essentially, these are where you will make the decisions. But before you can make these decisions, you need to perform standard due diligence. You need to monitor the measures and metrics of the corporation. And on our control panel, we essentially have three different sections, if you will, on our dashboard that provide us with information. The first one that we're looking at provides us with milestone data. And one of the most important things as a manager is to understand that milestones are points in time when something needs to be accomplished or completed. In our case, these milestones are quarterly, and they represent decisions need to be made by that specific date and time. And so the first aspect of managing is for you to understand what are the due dates in your simulation and when you need to complete the decisions for that particular quarter. Now, this also moves into another realm of characteristics of being a good manager, namely responsibility. It is your responsibility to make these decisions by the due date, and you will be held accountable for those decisions being performed and completed by the due date. This is very typical of management. You are responsible, and you are then held accountable for the results. So first and foremost, understand what are the due dates of each and every one of the quarters and plan accordingly. Second of all, it also shows you your current standing in the class based on cash in bank, based on total revenues, and based on a percentile of cash and bank. This gives you an idea of how you are positioned relative to the other companies and products in the industry. If you also have had teams in your simulation, and this is an option your professor has selected, if you have been assigned to a team, then you can look at team results as well. So the first part of your due diligence is to analyze the milestone information. The second component is what we call the growth analysis. Now, let me regress for a moment and point out that any place you see an asterisk implies that there is a tooltip that can provide you with some information. So if you look at the growth analysis, here is a tooltip. If you look at the gap analysis, here is a tooltip which we'll discuss in a moment. So our second aspect of our due diligence process is to look at the growth table, the growth analysis. And our objectives here are to ensure that each quarter our cash in bank is increasing. That's our goals and objectives, to ensure, if possible, in each quarter our gross margin is going up, to ensure each quarter our revenues are going up in the various markets that we have selected. So the second part of our due diligence, the second element on our dashboard, is growth analysis. And this allows us to understand, are our decisions effective? Are they improving the corporate posture? Are the corporate measures getting better? And so we need to analyze it. If they are, then we are on the right track. If they are not, then we have to take a look at our decisions to see why we may not be growing the company. The third element is how we can possibly enhance this growth rate. It is showing you your class, that is all of the companies or all of the products that are being sold in the industry, and it is listed to you in cash order. That is the company, the product, the individual who has the most cash in bank. And then it shows you other relevant information. But the most important aspect of the gap analysis, as it's called, is to look for gaps. Now, if we take a look, for example, at Market 2, we can see there are very, very few gaps. A gap implies that there is an opportunity that we can take advantage of to accelerate and increase our revenues, thus increase our cash in bank. So if we look at Market 2 and we look at Market 1, there really are very few gaps available to us. But if we go over to Market 4, you can very quickly see a tremendous gap. There is an opportunity that we may be able to accelerate our growth. But what does that mean? Since we're only able to sell into 3 markets, that means we have to move a product from one market to the other. So we may want to take a product that is not selling that much information or that many products and move it into Market 4 where we have less competition. So the idea is on our control panel, this is where we perform our due diligence before we go into product, marketing, and cash flow decision making. We look at our milestones, we look at our growth, and we look at our gap analysis. Once we have completed the due diligence, we then begin the next phase of our managerial process. And that is, we look at the product design and the associated markets. Now, when we look at the product design, there are 2 major elements that we need to understand. First of all, our product is going to be composed of up to 5 features. Now, depending upon the configuration of your simulation, they may be listed as shown here, which are generic features, or they may be actual features of various products. There are videos in your training area that will show you the difference between generic and vertical particular industries. However, in all cases, we're looking at a number of attributes associated with each and every one of these features. The first attribute is the cost, and the second is the suggested retail. Effectively, this gives you a very close approximation to gross margin if we exclude inventory. So one of the elements of your decision-making process in your product design is what price point you would like to sell your product. Now, a product that has a highly valued set of features can be sold at a much higher price, irrespective of the cost and the suggestion. So part two of your design decision is to look at what is called the value proposition. And what is the value proposition? The value proposition essentially is a measure of how important that particular feature is to a respective market, to a demographic. So for example, if we're selling textbooks and I happen to be a manufacturer or creator of engineering textbooks, I'm going to be interested in the engineering schools. On the other hand, if I'm selling business textbooks, I'm going to be interested in those schools that have business curriculum. Well, that is what the value proposition means. So if we take a look, for example, at feature 1, who has a 93 cents cost and a suggested retail of $9.60, we can see that it has no value in market 1. It has a fairly high value in markets 2 and 3, no value in market 4, and a reasonable market value in market 5. Continuing down the line, what we could see is if we take a look at feature 4, it has a very high value in market 1, no value in market 2, average market values in 3 and 4, and a very low one in 5. So the second aspect of your design, after looking at the margin analysis, is to look at the value proposition. And once you've selected your products merely by clicking on the check boxes, as you can see here, that is being done, you have then created a product that is composed of up to 5 features, that has a certain cost associated with it, a recommended retail, which you may or may not decide to follow, and a value. Now, the value is associated with the market. And if you can see here, in this case, this individual, this manager, has selected markets 1, 3, and 5 to sell into. And so if we update the product, the second part of our product design screen essentially gives us an overview of what it is we have done. It shows us the 5 features, it shows us the sum of the costs of those features, and it shows us the sum of the retail price. In this case, $30.97 is suggested retail. But most importantly, what it is doing is it's showing us the value proposition in the market. Now, since 7 is the highest value one can assign in a market, and we can have up to 5 features, that means the highest value proposition in a market can be 35. And if you can notice, in market 1 it's at 18, market 2 is at 21, market 3 is 24, 4 is 15, and 5 is 23. If this is the final design that the manager wishes to configure, then they would be much advised to change from market 1 to market 2. Why? Well, if you notice, here is the value proposition. So by changing from market 1 to market 2, we update the product. We now come down and we can see what we're doing is we're selling in the 3 markets where we have the highest value proposition. If we're not satisfied with 21, we can look, for example, at feature 8. And says feature 8 in market 2 is 0. So is there something else we can replace feature 8 with, in this case here? Maybe let's switch feature 8 to feature 9. Why? Because look, it is a value of 7 in market 2. So let's update, take a look. What has this done? And all of a sudden, notice we have now jumped to 28. So this is the type of design analysis you will go through in the product design screen. You will look at the selection of the products, up to 5 of them. You will ascertain the margin. You will look at the value proposition, and then you will select the appropriate markets. And then you can review, if you will, the results of your product decision making. Once we have completed the design of the product and the market selection, we move to the second phase of our managerial decision-making flow. And that is essentially marketing. And that is where we're going to look at, if you will, the ad plans, the advertising campaign, the promotional budgets, and so on. What is very important for us when we move into the marketing stage of our decision making is to understand we must make the customer in the market aware of our product. If no one is aware of our product, then there's going to have no one interested in buying the product. Why? Well, because they have no idea the product exists. So the most important element of the marketing aspect is to promote the product, to essentially create awareness of the product. Now, we do that by selecting what are called advertising plans. Now, as I mentioned before for the product features, depending upon how your professor has configured the simulation, you may see generic ad plan 1, 2, 3, 4, or you may actually see advertising components such as social media, TV, trade show, and so on. Again, irrespective of whether you're dealing with a generic or a vertical simulation, the process is going to be the same. What it is you need to do as a manager is select up to 3 ad plans that will constitute, if you will, an advertising campaign in each of your markets. Now, the ad plan is composed of what is called an effectiveness ratio or effectiveness rate or effectiveness value. This measure tells us how effective that particular ad plan or medium is in the designated market. For example, if we look at ad plan 2, we can see that in market 1, it has no effectiveness. What does this mean? This means irrespective of how much money we spend promoting in market 1 using ad plan 2, it will not add to the awareness of our population. They will not be aware of our product. On the other hand, if we look at ad plan 3 and we come into market 3, we see it's a 7, which tells us that this is an extremely effective advertising plan that in market 3 especially will be highly effective. And so when we create our advertising campaign, which is made up of 3 advertising plans, our goals are to select effectiveness that will allow us to employ our budgetary dollars to the greatest use. Now, since we only have 3 ad plans that we can select, the maximum effectiveness is 21. And so similar to the design of a product, we can select, if you will, ad plan 3 by checking it, remove ad plan 4 or ad plan 2, whatever our decisions happen to be, and then we update. Once we update, we're brought into a secondary area of our marketing screen, which in addition to requiring us to make a series of budgetary decisions and pricing decisions, also shows us the effectiveness of our campaigns in the selected markets. And as you can see, the ad campaign that we have created from ad plan 3, ad plan 4, and ad plan 7 has an effectiveness of 10 in market 2, 21 in market 3, which is the best it could possibly be. Notice everything is a 7, and 16. So what this means is that the promotional dollars in market 3 are going to be much more effective. That is, $1 of budget is going to be much more effective in making the customer aware of our product, whereas a dollar budget in market two is going to be half as effective. Now, we could change, if you will, our ad components, our campaign components, and try to increase this by looking at ad plan 4. What can we do? So either you can attempt to enhance, if you will, the ad campaign effectiveness, or plan on spending more money. And as you can see, what we do is the next set of managerial decisions in this case are the promotional budgets in the targeted markets. Now, we want to heavily promote in the market that our product is highly rated in. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the value proposition in market 3? So we can go back and look at the value proposition in market 3 and see, is it a highly respected product in the market? So we may be advertising, have a tremendous advertising campaign in a product that is of very little interest in that market. So that is a decision that you would now iterate back between the product screen and the marketing screen. You also can change and say, well, I really want to promote in market 2, but I need to promote a considerably more amount of money since it is not as effective. So once I've made my budgetary decisions on my promotional dollars, that is my advertising dollars promoting the product in the various markets, the next step is to determine what is my selling price. If my product and the selling price is really across all 3 markets, if I believe my product has a high value proposition across all 3 markets, then I really can go ahead and sell it, if you will, above the list price. Now notice there is a restriction that we can't charge more than 2 times the suggested list price. But the idea is, if I'm in a less competitive market with a product that has a high value proposition, then I may be tempted to increase the price above suggested list. On the other hand, if I'm in a market that is highly contested, that is a very competitive market, then I may need to reduce my price so that way I can gather more individuals at a lower price point, given the value is equal. So once I've made my pricing decision, the last one is to forecast how many units do I intend to sell. And as you can see in this case, the manager has determined 1,300 units. They have 0 quantity on hand, that is, they have no units left in inventory. So what they will do is they will go ahead and they may project 1,400 and so on. Now understand, if you project X number of units and you don't sell X number of units, they're going to remain in inventory, which you will see in your quantity on hand, and there's a storage charge for that excess inventory. So as in the real world, you need to be extremely conservative initially in the determination of your sales projection. That is the number of units that you wish to sell. Once you are happy with your budgetary decisions, your pricing decisions, and your forecasting, you then update the information and just be reflected in the simulation. So your marketing decisions are essentially 2-step. One is determine the ad campaign, and number 2, the promotional dollars, pricing, and forecasting. Once we have completed the second phase of our managerial decision-making process, we now proceed to the third and last stage, namely managing cash flow. And one of the aspects that we learn in business is cash is king. And what this means is, even though we may have millions of dollars of profit on our P&L, if we don't have cash in bank, we cannot pay our bills, we cannot pay our employees. So cash flow is extremely important as part of a manager's responsibility, is to ascertain that we are always in a positive cash flow. So let's take a look at this third step in our managerial flow. And when we move into our cash control screen, if you will, we come up with a cash flow. Now this cash flow represents, if you will, the current elements, the inflows and the outflows, and a running total. Now the most important component of this cash flow screen that one needs to take a very close look at is the potential revenue. Potential revenue represents our estimate of the number of units we are going to be selling. Now, that is merely an estimate. So as you can see, in this pro forma cash flow, we are looking at $51,282 in potential revenue. Now, we may end up selling no units at all, which means our cash flow is not going to have that funds in the flow. We will not receive those revenue items. On the other hand, the purchase, where we look at, in this case here, we are actually going to be paying $22,890 for the number of units we have ordered. Now, if we don't sell all of them, then they will appear in this inventory cost. And as if you remember, in our marketing screen, we saw that this manager had zero quantity on hand, therefore they had zero storage cost. So in your decision-making process, in your marketing screen, you need to look at your forecast, and your forecast will impact these two in and outflow type of values and parameters. So with that in mind, you look at the various inflow, your current cash in bank. You could borrow from your personal bank account. You can borrow from your personal credit card. The outflows represent interest expenses that you have, and so on. And so once you look at your cash flow, which says the projected cash flow is a positive $128,097 in this case. Now, how comfortable are we? If we're not very comfortable in that cash flow, we now come to the second element, and this is our decision-making process. Here we could borrow additional funds, and it shows us how much is available left for us to borrow. We can borrow from personal credit cards, and it shows us the interest rate. We can borrow commercial loans. We can get a loan from our family, and so on. So these represent, if you will, safety nets where we can go out, borrow capital from the various sources, and add to our cash flow. So if, for example, you'll notice we have $100 showing up in the personal bank account, we can change that to be $200. And if we change that to be $200 and update, what this will do is it now will show us 200. That 200 has been added in and has increased our number from 128,097 to 128,197. So we can add a layer of comfort to the bottom line cash flow number by borrowing certain funds from various sources. In addition to borrowing funds, we also have an expense line here. Now, what the HR expense does, the HR expense charges us a salary, which we will pay on a quarterly basis. In addition to that, there are various improvements in the overall organizational operation. We'll see revenue improvements. That means our marketing department is becoming more efficient, more effective. And we see our operational cost reductions. That means our operational department is becoming much more effective. So you can invest in, and this is an outflow of capital, you can invest, for example, $1,000 in HR. And what this will do is this will be treated as an outflow. As you can see, reduce our monies by the associated amount, but also gives us various projections of improvements, if you will, in what we're dealing with. Lastly, we can sell stock, equity. So your choice as a manager is debt or equity. Debt means borrowing capital. Equity means selling ownership in the corporation. And so you can sell ownership for the various share prices that are shown, and this will also bring additional capital into the corporation. So the cash flow objective is very simple. Ensure you have a positive value and ensure that you are comfortable based on the revenue projections that this will remain positive. Even if we don't sell the $51,000, we still would have positive cash flow. So in this case, this manager has built sufficient cash in bank, as you can see, over $114,000 to cover expenses. And this is what you as a manager are the objectives. And remember, you monitor a series of measures and metrics, and then you manage. And so here you're monitoring your cash metric, and you're managing by deciding to take additional funds out or by dealing with equity. Once you have completed making the cash decisions, the finance decisions, if you will, in the corporation, you have completed the managerial flow for the quarter. Now remember, as you progress through the various stages of making these decisions, you have various tooltips that you can use based on the asterisk that you see. And by placing the asterisk in the particular term, you will see a tooltip. You can always go back to your training videos and films that we have. And in here, you can look at your quarterly information. You can look at the business terms. You can look at the student guide. And for example, the intro, the product design, repeat, the cash flow review, and so on. So the idea behind it is you have a lot of support as you proceed to make your various decisions. But most importantly, understand the managerial flow. It is due diligence, whereupon completing that, it is a series of decisions, managerial decisions in terms of product, marketing, and cash flow. And thus the introduction to business, the game simulation, is emulating the various characteristics of a manager in the real world. And so proceed to follow these set of processes so that you can appreciate what it will be like when you become a manager in a corporation in the real business environment.